For this tutorial, I'm going to create this blobby effect that I recently used in the number 13 for my Christmas Advent renders. So what I'm going to do is create it using a sphere, and then that can kind of show you how you can basically replace that sphere with anything else, a logo, a head, a face. Use these techniques to apply to other things. Please remember to like and subscribe, and I will try and get through some more of the numbers from this year's Advent renders because a lot of people were interested in how they were done. Okay, with that being said, let's get started. Right, so to start off with this effect, let's bring in a sphere. We'll leave it at 100 for the radius, but we'll up the segments to something like 200. I'm going to change it from a standard to an icosahedron just because I think it's nicer when it comes to meshing it with a volume mesher. Let's bring in a cloner, and we'll bring in another sphere. Let's add that to the cloner, and let's take the size of this radius down to something like 5. And under the cloner, let's call this like OG bubbles. I'm not quite sure what to call these. So OG bubbles. Let's change the this to object, and then our object is going to be the sphere. So obviously we can change the seed to kind of, you know, see where we think is a nice sort of like layout or distribution over the surface of the sphere. And then we can up the count. So maybe we'll change that to 40. With this selected, let's go up here, and I'm going to add on a random effector. But I'm going to turn off position, so I don't want to change the position. I'm going to change the scale, or turn on uniform and absolute, and maybe set this to 2. Now what I might do is just up the segments on here to something like 48, just to smooth that out. The next thing I want to do is probably some of these are kind of a bit too close together, or they're intersecting, so we want to kind of push them apart, so we can use the push apart effector to do that. So let's grab a push apart, and at the minute they'll disappear because it's actually pushing them apart by quite a lot. I think the default is by 100 centimeters, but we know that our sphere is 5 centimeters in width, so we can say, right, we only want them pushed apart by 5 centimeters. So that's kind of nicely distributed over the surface now. Okay, so with that done, now we can start actually creating the blobby kind of effect on the surface of the sphere, and how these kind of poke out and kind of leave these ripples around the edges. So it's pretty simple. So let's get the sphere. I'm going to hold down Alt, then add a volume builder and a volume mesher. Copy these bubbles, and I'm going to call these outer. And then I'm going to copy them again, and we'll call this inner. Okay, so you can see where it's starting to affect the surface, but obviously we need a bit more resolution. So I'm going to take this down to something like 1. You need a kind of reasonable amount for this. Let's hide our OG bubbles. So for our outer, we want them to be bigger than the original sphere. So let's maybe take this up to something like 7 in the radius. And then for the inner, we've got a radius of 5. Maybe we'll make it like 5.5. So it's a little bit bigger than the original bubbles we have. And then what I want to do is we want to make a hole in these so we can see the bubbles in the center. So with the inner selected, let's go to transform, and let's take the Z position, and I'll just change it to 5 for the moment. And see what that's doing is it's pushing it out of the circle, so it's giving us this kind of hole. Maybe we'll change this to 6 for now. Let's just see what this looks like. And then under our volume builder, we've obviously got our outer is going to be a union, and our inner we actually want to subtract. Obviously it looks pretty nasty at the moment. We can turn on our OG bubbles, and we can see how that sits. So the magic happens with this by adding on some smoothing. So let's add a smoothing, and let's just change this so the smoothing is up the top. So now see, it gets rid of all of those like jaggedy edges and smooths it out. So we've kind of got these pockets on here. So almost, we hide this, almost looks like a moon surface. And I guess you could do something with that if you wanted to do some sort of cartoony space scene. You've got a little like moon there. And again, we can we can push these apart more, or we could change the position of these by selecting. We'd obviously want to make sure all of these are same, so selecting all of them, and then we can change the seeding On here, we'll just need to give it a minute because it's got to, as well as changing the seeding, we've got to do the volume builder and mesher. And you see, I kind of prefer how it was originally. I like kind of the way it was spaced out. I mean, you could also change the seeding on the random effector to decide which ones are bigger and smaller. So maybe let's change that. There we go. So it's got something like that. It looks a bit more spread out. Okay, right. With that done, now we want to kind of have that effect of them starting off with a shape, and they all come in and they all go out. Let's select all of these because we want all of these to be affected. Let's go up here. Let's get a plane effector. Okay, and with this parameter, I'm going to turn off position, turn on scale. I'm just going to turn off the volume builder and mesher for the moment. And our scale, we want that to be -1. So we want it to disappear. But then we want to use a fall off that we're going to pass through. So let's turn on fall off and we'll get a box field, this square. And let's just increase the size of this. Maybe we'll increase the width on either side so it encompasses it. And then what we're going to do is pass this through. Obviously we want to start with nothing and then they come on and go. So the way I'm going to do that is by going to our box field, go to the remapping, and I'm going to invert that. And I'm going to change the contour to curve. So it just gives us a smoother kind of contour. And then we can kind of move that through. So let's just bring this to the right to the bottom. Go on frame 1. I'm just going to set a keyframe. Let's go to, like, say frame 60. So that's 2 seconds in. I'm going at 30 frames per second here. So let's move this through and then just move it off screen. Nice. And set another keyframe. Now that's working. What I want to do is go to the dope sheet. I don't want it to kind of speed up in the middle. Currently, our position on the Y, so you've got this easing. I'm going to select the frames and make this linear. Have that pass through. And obviously you can make that longer, shorter, however. I'm also going to add a kind of a delay effector on here to kind of make it more bubbly. So let's, again, just make sure we select all 3. And then we want to add a delay effector. And we want to affect the scale. And under effector, we want to change that to spring. And maybe we'll change this to like 90%, so quite large. Let's see what that looks like. There we go, see it bouncing. That's probably too much. Let's change it to like 75. I probably went too over the top. There we go, I can see it popping in and out. Let's go to project settings. I'm going to change this to 120, so that's 4 seconds. And go to the dope sheet. Find it, there we go. And I'm going to extend this to 90 because basically I want to kind of get to the plane sphere again before the end of 4 seconds. They come in and they go out. Okay, cool. So with that done, you know, we can turn back on our volume builder and mesher. We can see how that looks. It's all working, but obviously, you know, it's going to run slow until we actually render it. Now we can, I mean, R23 of Cinema, what we can do is under the volume builder, we can go down here and click this little green sort of film strip. We can actually cache the whole animation if we wanted to. So that just means that we can run through and play it back in the scene, but it will add a lot of file size. What I want to do first though is, at the moment we've got this kind of cube moving through the scene. Let me just turn this off again. As we've got this moving through, add a little bit more randomness to the motion by applying a random field in this plane or to this box as it moves through. If I go to the plane, to the fall off, I'm going to add a random field. Now initially, we're not going to see much difference straight away because we need to really turn off the delay effector, because the delay effector will kind of mess up when you're trying to move things through the scene. So let's just turn that off for a moment. And then with the random effector on, I'm just going to go to plane and then just set this to overlay. And then what that will do is just, as we're moving through, it just means everything isn't happening at exactly the same time in a straight line as we go up. It's just adding a tiny bit of randomness in there additionally. And we can turn the delay effector back on. We could turn on our volume builder and mesher. What we could do, just so it makes it easier to run through when we're doing the materials, is go to the volume builder, go to that cache layer that we added, this little green icon, go to animation, and let's say we want to record or cache the animation of frame 0 to 120, then press cache. Obviously it's got to do the figuring out for this. It looks like it's probably going to take about 30 seconds, but I'll speed it up and come back to you. Okay, and now that's cached, we can actually move through the scene. And actually the only thing that isn't cached is our actual original bubbles. So we could go to that, go to tags, Mograph, get a Mograph cache and bake those circles or spheres as well. And then we can easily scrub through without any weirdness happening. Now if we scrub back and forth, we can see our animation working quite smoothly. Okay, cool. So now that's set up. Now we'll do the materials. Now, before I do the materials, just to say that the way this is set up, basically, we can just apply any other shape to this if we wanted to. So where we have this sphere, you know, that's where you could have, like I did in my number 13, or you could have a logo, or, you know, a head, and these kind of all kind of appear over the head and disappear. You could maybe make these like eyeballs or something. So, you know, you could definitely have a play with it. So I just wanted to show you kind of how I modeled that. Okay, so let's set this up in Octane. We'll just kind of get a nice view of this. Let's, I'm going to render this out just for this video, basically. So I'm going to make this 1920 by 1080. We'll make it 30 frames. Obviously, we're going to want to render all frames. Let's get a camera. Actually, we want an Octane camera. So let's go to Octane live viewer window, and let's bring in Octane camera. And then under the camera, I think I'm going to change this to like a tele lens. It can kind of be more straight on, something like that. And then I'm going to hide these layers just so we can kind of see what's going on. Now we can either put in a kind of a sloped background, or we can just do a solid color. I think for this one, I'll probably just save it as a solid color, but let's just press render and see what we're looking at. I'm going to change to path tracing. And what I want to do next is probably add a HDRI in. So let's go objects, HDRI environment. And actually, let's name that HDRI. And then I want to get a texture environment. So this is going to be the color of the background. So let's just call this BG color. You've probably seen me do this in other tutorials. Okay, so for the BG color, underneath under main type, we're going to say that's the visible environment. So that's actually what we see in this background. And the HDRI is actually the light environment. So let's grab a HDRI, and I'm going to use this Canada Montreal Pierre Kitchen, which is from a free HDRI pack. I'll put a link in the description below. That just gives us kind of a rough starting off of our lighting. You know, we can rotate this around. Hang on, here we go. Want something like that. Okay, that's good. And we can add other lights in, but for now we'll just leave it like that. And so we want to have this material that's kind of for the center, and I'll do a material that's similar to the one I did for that number 13. Let's go to materials, and we want to create a specular material. Let's open that up. Now a couple of things we want to do. First off, under common, I'm going to turn on fake shadows. It kind of makes it less render intensive. Let's just throw it onto our volume mesher. And then under medium, we're going to get a scattering medium. And then let's open this up, and let's go to absorption. Actually, let's open up the node editor. It's probably an easier way of doing this. We want to get an RGB spectrum. Let's pump that into absorption. And for this, I'm just going to kind of make it like a mid-gray. And then we'll get another one, take that into scattering. And this one we want to be our red color. And it's quite dark at the moment, and also our density is quite high. So let's take this down quite low to 4. Then I'm going to go to my camera settings, turn on enable camera imager, and I'm going to take the exposure up to something like 2.4 just to brighten everything up. And we can play around with these other settings later. I'm going to change the background color as well. So in the original video I did for 13, we had a green color. I guess it was supposed to be kind of Christmassy. We could just change this to any color we want. Maybe something like that for now. Yeah, so we could probably add a light in behind. So let's go objects, lights, with nothing selected. Let's do Octane targeted area light. So that gives us a target, which is the middle of the scene. And I'm going to put this light behind our object. You see, we're kind of almost getting this rim light on our sphere. Let's just push this back. It's letting some light through. It's probably a bit too bright, but I kind of like that. Let's take the opacity down so we can't see it in camera, and I'm going to take the brightness of this light down a bit. Obviously, because this is physical, the size of the light does matter. The bigger the light is, actually the brighter it is. So you kind of have to play around with adjusting how light you want that to be compared with the power and the size. So I'm just going to maybe have that quite low. We'll leave it like that for now, and I might add another light in that's going to use the same light target, and I'm going to bring this over here at the front. You can see we can kind of it looks like we can sort of see under the surface of that. So let's kind of create these blobs that are on the inside. So let's create a new specular material, and this one's going to be we'll call this light blobs, and we're going to add this onto these OG bubbles. And let's turn on the padlock, so this kind of makes it the size that we're finally rendering at, which is 1920 1080. You can see, because we're using a specular material, obviously it's taking its time in trying to render, but I'm also rendering at quite a high resolution at 16,000 samples. So I might take this down to something, say like 500, turn on adaptive sampling. This GI clamp we can probably get down to about 1. And yeah, I think that's what I'll leave that as for now. And then what I'll also do is in the camera, let's go to here in the camera imager, and we'll enable the AI denoiser. And you see now this is going to take 41 seconds to render. And the nice thing about the AI denoiser is it will kind of clean up some of this noise once you're rendered. So let's just let this render through. And the nice thing obviously about using a solid color for the background is we're not rendering the background. The background is not having to calculate that. What we can do is render with an alpha channel, then just put a gradient on as a background in After Effects. Okay, so let's see once that's rendered. That seems to be done. See, that's what we're currently looking like. But if we go to demain, see, that's got rid of all of our noise. So main, demain. So I'm just going to take a step forward by just explaining how we can save out using that. We go to our render settings and change to Octane Renderer. Under Octane Renderer, now you can render as render passes and choose your denoise layer and stuff like that. But what we'll just do is within main, we'll just check this box, use denoise beauty pass, and then we can just save as normal in here. I'll save as PNGs 16-bit. We'll check alpha channel because we want an alpha channel. And the way we can also do that is by our Octane settings. Let's check alpha channel there, and you see it shows us the alpha channel here. Now, with all of those options selected, it will render PNGs with an alpha channel. Now, when you actually start rendering in the picture viewer, you'll notice it will have a solid color in the background. That's just while it's rendering, but you'll see your PNGs will actually have an alpha channel. So, okay, we've gone a step forward there. So let's go back. I'm just going to take the size down of this just so we can see it. And like I said, or like we saw before, we'll clean up all of our noise down the line. There you go. So what we want to do is add on those kind of balls that have that light effect in them, and they're multiple colors. So let's go to the OG bubbles. I'm just going to clear the cache because we're going to add something additional on here. And let's add in another random. We're going to call this one random color. And under parameters, let's turn off position, scales off, rotations off, color mode. We just want that to be effector color. So that's gonna, you can see here in the display, it's put all of these random colors on, and we can use that data in Octane to apply a random set of colors. So let's go to our light box, light blobs material. Roughness, we're gonna probably up this to something high, or maybe a bit lower than that. And we want to get a medium again. So let's again get a scattering medium. And then we've got our absorption and our scattering. So absorption, let's go into the node editor. And let's get an RGB spectrum. Let's pump that into the absorption. Let's just kind of make this like a mid sort of color, gray. Let's get spectrum. And we're going to put this into, actually we're not going to put that into the scattering, because what we're going to do is add in a gradient. So let's get a gradient, an Octane gradient. This is going to be our colors. Delete this. And let's get a gradient of, I'm going to keep it white on one end. Let's say bright red. And in the middle we'll go yellow, maybe a bit of more of an orangey yellow. Okay, so that's our gradient. That's our like random selection of colors we want. Now we want to get a Mograph color shader, and we want to take that into the gradient. So it's going to take that multiple color information into this gradient, and then we're going to take that into the scattering. So you see it's giving those colors randomly to these. Now the next thing we want to do is actually I'm going to add these to the transmission. So the transmission is kind of the color of the transparency. So I'm going to pump that into there as well, and that should pump up the colors a bit. So the final part of this is we want that emission, we want that light. So let's go back to that scattering medium again. And let's go to plugins, Octane, and let's add a texture emission. You can see there it's adding bright light already, but we're going to add colored light. So I'm going to bring that gradient back into there. You see it's super bright at the moment. So let's go back to the emission, and let's just take the size down. Let's say make this like, let's maybe even less than that, like 5. Split the difference, 7.5. There you go. So we're getting that kind of light in there. Because I'm rendering this out with the alpha channel, I'm going to add the gradient in After Effects, so then I can kind of have a bit more of a play with what color I think is suitable for the background. But we can run through and see how this works. We can see our bulbs coming in, bouncing, and going back out again. That's cool. And what I might do is on our main color, I might up that roughness something. No, that's far too high. Maybe like 0.2. There you go, something like that. And then maybe we'll play around with HDRI. Maybe we'll take this down a little bit. We need to re-bake, so these kind of line up with the timings. We bake that, then drag through. There you go. Now we can see that everything is lining up correctly, and you know, we can zoom in, and now you can see how we're, especially on here, because we've got that in our main. If we go to our medium, got that low density, means we kind of get that nice thing of seeing the light kind of through the main material. And we could up that light a little bit more, maybe. Don't want to blow it out. I think that looks cool. Okay, so that's how I achieved that effect. I just wanted to show you how that was done. I'm just going to render this out now as a series of PNGs, and you'll see a gradient on the final piece that I add in After Effects before exporting from there. So that's that for today. I hope you found this useful or interesting in some way, and I'll create another tutorial soon. Okay, cheers, bye.